So how do you get this process going? What would be some of the specific steps? And we'll kind of help you to visualize a really simplified process for ways that you could start to engage young people. The bulk of the time is going to be spent on examples, because I think one of the best ways to begin to see or think about how this could play out in your organization, or how you, if you're already doing this work, some additional ideas that you might be able to take home is through examples of what other young people are doing. And then have a chance for you to think about what does this mean for you, and what are your ideas, and how might you implement some of these ideas, what are your takeaways. Young people need adults as allies in this work. Adults are needed to help your board understand why young people should be involved, to help to talk to your funders about how this can actually drive better decision making and potentially more useful, more authentic information. So just to give you a couple examples of how these work, right? So we can all think about evaluating a specific program. So young people in a summer program create a plan to document the activities. They interview other youth participants to assess their experiences. They compile their information, and they share that with program staff. Assess community change, community conditions. So one of the groups that I work with in San Francisco was interested in creating healthier neighborhoods. And so one of the things that they did was conduct a walking tour of the neighborhood with young people. And so young people walked around and they mapped their neighborhood based on things that they perceived to be healthy or unhealthy, or safe or unsafe from their perspective, not from the staff's perspective or from what other people would think is safe, policymakers might think is safe or healthy or unhealthy, but through the young people's eyes. They mapped it, and then they could step back from that mapping and try to assess what that means, what are the kinds of recommendations that might come from young people back to policymakers, and how they could develop a campaign out of it. Organizational evaluation, another example. So young people that we worked with conducted a survey of other youth about how the organization uses social media. So many of our organizations are interested in trying to use social media in different kinds of ways for outreach or recruitment. But how does it work? And what do young people what's the best, most effective way to actually reach young people? So instead of having just staff develop a plan, engaging young people and identifying a way to reach out to other youth and ask them about social media, ask them about how they might want to receive communications from the organization, and then they use that information to develop recommendations and to develop a plan of how the organization could use social media more effectively to engage youth. So just some examples and ideas for thinking about how to get started. When we start to talk to organizations, it's not that they haven't thought about how to involve young people, they're just not exactly sure how to get started. And so we developed this kind of simplified kind of steps in the process as a way to kind of quickly visualize how involving young people in evaluation could be seen and could be kind of implemented. I think the biggest point that we often make is that there's no real one right way to do evaluation. And what's most important from our perspective, if it's truly participatory and about involving young people, is that it has to make sense to your organization and has to make sense to who your young people are and how they want to engage and how they do engage. One of the reasons why we do this in a circle is, again, because we think that this is ongoing and that this should be ongoing and not a one-time event, not something that you do once and put on a shelf, but rather when evaluation is truly about developing knowledge for change or developing knowledge for action and truly is about developing youth leadership, then it's part of an ongoing process. We get organized, we ask questions, we gather information, we understand it, we share it, we use it, and we ask more questions. So when we talk about that first step, it's pretty simple. You need to get organized. And it always starts with a small group of people moving forward. So in some cases, this is a group of young people who are part of a leadership organization who want to take the lead in developing an evaluation plan. In other cases, it's youth and adults working together. Or in some cases, it's an adult who's working on an evaluation for the organization but wants to include young people in it. But it starts with having a few people come together to take the lead in moving it forward. And then to have a strategy for doing it. What do you want to know? What's the goals? What's the purpose of why we're gathering information? And then how are we going to go about doing it? once you have the group and you've got some ideas about what it is you want to do, I think the tendency is to jump quickly into, let's do a survey, or let's do interviews, but we haven't really stepped back to think about what it is that we're trying to gather information about. What do we really want to know? And then how does that, what we want to know, lead to the kinds of questions that we might ask? The other reason to do this is I think that we're used to thinking that we only have to know certain kinds of things, like how many young people show up to our program, or how many flyers did we pass out, which may or may not actually lead you to thinking about what kind of information that you actually would help drive your program or help drive better decision making in your organizations or help drive community change. So stepping back and really having the discussion as opposed to thinking about just what do we typically think that we should be gathering, I think is a really important step, not just for youth, but for organizations as well. Gathering information. When we were talking in the earlier session, it was really clear that most of the evaluations that young people are a part of don't feel authentic, they feel really boring, they're not helpful, they're not creative, they're not engaging, they don't allow for kind of new ideas to emerge, right? So being able to think about that there's lots of different ways to gather information, from traditional forms to really creative forms. And so to encourage the process of thinking again about what do you want to know and what are the sources of information, and then thinking about what are the various ways that we could gather that information. We were talking about the simplicity of a debrief after an organizational meeting and how many people use debriefs with their young people to kind of find out how something went or what people learned from it. But how rarely do people actually write that down in a systematic way and then step back and learn from it, or gather it over multiple meetings and then step back and learn from it to think about the changes that are happening within the youth or the needs or kind of whatever needs to happen in your programs to make things better. A couple of methods I'll just highlight, and then again, as we do examples, you'll see more about it. Historian is one that I like, and again, this was from a group in Oakland, California, who was doing all kinds of really incredible community organizing work, but they didn't systematically kind of capture their events. And so they didn't have somebody who was like their photographer, who would kind of take pictures to make sure somebody was always recording what they were doing. They didn't have somebody who was systematically looking at the newspaper to find out what the media clips were from their rally or whatever it is that they had been putting on. They didn't have somebody who was even capturing the flyers that were being passed out. So they created a historian whose role was to make sure that the activities were being documented at a minimum throughout the course of the year. They created a scrapbook that kind of kept the photos, the information about what had happened, the media clips, the flyers in a systematic place. Then when they went to step back, not only could they look at their accomplishments over the course of the year, they had then the kind of data to back up what they had done, and be able to kind of showcase their work to their board, to their organization, to other young people, to their funders. So it became a useful tool for that process as well as to be able to pass back to the next year what had been done. It's not a big stretch from what you're probably already doing. It's just about thinking about it more systematically. I want to mention one other thing about this kind of youth interviewing youth about a program. There's real power when young people can ask other young people questions. Again, the group in Oakland, California, they appointed a young person, a high school student, to be the head evaluator. And there were a number of people from outside of the project who were like, how could a high school student be the head evaluator for the program? And they were asking, and then they kind of engaged in a conversation with this young person. And she said, it's interesting. People can't sugarcoat ideas when I'm asking young people questions, or when young people are asking young people questions. They tend to tell me the truth. I build a rapport with them, and I can get authentic information about what's really happening in the program. And it's not to say that we shouldn't have outside evaluators or have social systematic scales or all these other things. But there is real power when young people can ask other young people questions, or when young people can help hold focus groups. But once you gather all this information, then the process of making sense for it, right? So stepping back and thinking about how do we understand it? What are the patterns we see? What does this information mean? What does this tell us? This is, again, where young people are just such powerful members of an evaluation team, because the patterns and what they see from what gets collected and how it might matter is sometimes very different from what adults would see in the information. So engaging young people in that process is really important. Sharing with others. So again, once you have information, who needs to hear it? Who are the stakeholders? How do you share it? There are many ways. One example of just a real creative way through the Youth Dialogues Project, they had collected all these stories about how young people experienced the program and also how they experienced growing up in Metro Detroit. And Mosaic Youth Theater was a partner in the early years of that program, and Mosaic took the findings from the evaluation and they turned it into a play called Speak for Yourself. And Speak for Yourself was literally about the voices of young people being able to talk about how they experienced growing up and about the findings from when young people could engage in real conversations with people who were different from themselves about what they learned, about how it changed the way they think, and about what they want to do with it. And that play, Speak for Yourself, then went across, all across Metro Detroit, different parts of Michigan. They traveled outside of Michigan as well. Again, not something that I would have ever thought of, but when you get young people in the room starting to talk about how evaluation can be really useful, interesting ideas emerge. Okay, and then just the last piece, how can this information be used to take action? Way too often, evaluations happen, young people are evaluated all the time, and then it doesn't go anywhere, or they don't know what happens with it. You may use that information to help be sent to your funders or to be sent for other purposes, but the young people who actually were part of the evaluation don't actually know what the findings were. So just to kind of highlight some of the takeaways here, how you move from ideas to action. Again, no one right way, no one approach. The most important thing, especially when starting to think about involving young people, is to figure out what fits with your organization, who are the youth who can and would want to be involved, should be involved. Sometimes the youth that you most want involved wouldn't necessarily see evaluation as something that's exciting. But when you start to talk about how evaluation and developing knowledge can lead to better decision making, can lead to leadership, can lead to power and change, it transforms the way they see themselves in the process. Who are the adults? So hopefully some of you are those adults, but who are other adults, either in your organization, that can be champions for this, that can help talk about the power of what it means to involve young people in evaluation, that can help to make the case for it. And then what's the strategy or plan for getting started? Giving you a lot of information here, but now I want to kind of ground it in some real examples so you could start to just see how others are using this and maybe think about how you might use it as well. Okay, so our Youth Dialogues program I mentioned briefly. The program brings young people together across race and ethnicity, across city and suburb to engage in intergroup dialogues. In addition to the dialogue program, young people are involved in social activities, in a bus tour of Metro Detroit, in different policy level work to think more critically about race and ethnicity. Since the beginning, young people have been involved in evaluation, and it was part of the initial design. And again, because of our work, we thought it was really important that not only did we have kind of the pre-post test using social scientific scales, but that we also had an opportunity for young people to have a voice in thinking about what they're learning and how they're learning it and how they can share that information with program staff. Every year, there's a group of young people who become the evaluation team. It's often people who had participated the summer before, so they have some contextual knowledge about the program and are kind of better able to think about what would be the important questions to ask. So we start to meet as a team, build the relationships, and then discuss kind of what the goals, get ourselves organized, right? Discuss the goals, think about kind of what questions the team might ask, and to think about their approach. Oftentimes the questions are related to experiences in the program, but sometimes they've asked questions broader about how young people experience growing up in Metro Detroit. Once they've developed their questions, then they start to think about how they might approach it. The youth evaluation team every year comes up with different kinds of methods. There have been some that have started to be used every year, and I'll talk about their survey, both from traditional forms to less traditional forms, more creative forms. So surveys that they do, program evaluation surveys that were again generated by young people and have been used each year by youth in the program. Interviews, so they've interviewed one another about how they experienced the program. Video interviews, so in one year they captured the interviews on video and then produced a short film about young people's experience in the program. And one of the things that was interesting about that is not only did it help to develop knowledge about the program and was used by the program staff, but it also became a tool that we could showcase what this program was and what young people learn in it to others. And so it was shown to different funders, it was shown to other universities that were interested in developing dialogue programs, so it had kind of a multiple benefit. Documentation, so young people who are picture takers, who are kind of note recorders, and that information gets compiled every year. Photographs, so we often will have young people taking pictures in their communities and then using that information to help understand issues of race and ethnicity in the metro area. One of the other kind of creative ways that young people have used evaluation and dialogue, or kind of methods, was doing drawings. And so one year, the youth evaluation team said, what we really would like to do is to have young people draw their experience. And I thought, okay, well, that's kind of an interesting approach. I'm not sure how it will work. But they had groups of young people draw 2 pictures, kind of who were they before they started the program, and then how would they draw themselves after the program. And I was kind of skeptical about it at first, but it was so powerful, the drawings that came out. And then the youth evaluation team then led a discussion where young people explained their picture and talked about kind of what they thought some of the impacts and some of the lessons learned were. And it wasn't always positive, and that's where I took it to be authentic. There were many that showed different kinds of change in the way that they drew themselves before and after. It became a really authentic way to have a real discussion about what young people were learning or not learning, or ways that we could improve. So one of the tools that the young people created was a survey. And the survey was, again, we had always done a pre-post test, but they wanted to have a voice in being able to talk about what young people were really getting from the program in their own words. And so one of the youth evaluation teams developed a survey with standardized kinds of questions, but because it was youth then asking other youth to fill it out, people gave kind of really in-depth responses to each one of these questions, which again have been used every year to transform the way the program operates, or to think more critically about elements of it. And each year the youth evaluation team usually looks back at that survey and kind of makes changes to it. So to move on to kind of a very different example with a creative method, I'm going to invite Monique to come up and talk a little bit about Corner Health and how they use photo voice as a process.
I'm Monique Hoyle, and I'm a health educator at the Corner Health Center. We are an adolescent health center based in downtown Ypsilanti, Michigan. We've been there for over 30 years, and we provide primary care, mental health, support, and education to young people ages 12 through 21, and the children of youth ages 12 through 21. So beyond being this awesome clinic that young people can come to receive care, we also do a lot of community programming and youth programming, and that's kind of what I'm going to highlight here. This is a picture of our first Youth Leadership Council group, which we started back in the summer of 2011. And what we did was we decided to do a photo voice project as a way to start to look at community health issues. So oftentimes when we think about health, especially in a primary care setting, it's you need to exercise and eat right, and you're going to make healthy decisions. But we know that health is much broader than that there are community factors that impact young people's well-being, your own adults' well-being. So we wanted to start to talk with young people about that. What is it in your community that either makes you healthier or maybe is detrimental to your health? And so Photo Voice is a really cool tool to kind of start to capture that information and sort through that information. Basically what you do is you teach young people, engage young people in learning about photography, using photography as a tool to capture information in your community. And then you select different themes that you want to photograph. So the young people themselves would select those themes and then select the photos that resonate most with them, develop captions to go along with them, and then hold exhibits in the community to kind of share that information back. And ultimately, hopefully, it would lead to some sort of action project. So, okay, we've identified this thing that we want to take action on, so this is the impetus for that. So the process was really straightforward. It was an 8-week summer program. We had a photographer come in and work with the group on photography basics and ethics. We did a lot of team building to bring this group together because we were doing a lot of work together, and just sitting at a table all day is not so exciting. So we got off our feet and did some stuff. And then after that, we selected weekly health themes. So we said, okay, what does health mean to you? And it might be exercise. So we'd be like, okay, if exercise is what you want to focus on, let's start to understand exercise beyond the individual behavior. So we did some health workshops to go along with the themes they selected, and then created assignments together. How can we capture this in our community, both the strengths and the weaknesses? That's a really key part of Photo Voice, is that you're looking at what's good and bad. And then we discussed the photos using the SHOWed method. This is a method in the literature around Photo Voice, a way to kind of process the images that you're seeing. And then at the end of the program, we selected the photos, developed captions, and did a mock exhibit, which was then followed by more formal exhibits later on in the year. This is one picture by one of our participants. I think this came from a week where the theme was stress. And so she was looking at assets in Ypsilanti that maybe help people feel less stressed. And she thought that the flowers in Ypsilanti were beautiful. She took tons of pictures of flowers. And so her caption was, "The potted plants in downtown Ypsi and the bright flowers in the garden are hidden treasures waiting to catch the next pedestrian's eye." This is the next one, The Exhausted Lady. The caption reads, "You wish you had the transportation, but instead you're left with stress." One of the themes that we did was food, and the first time we went out to take pictures, what we got back were pictures of food, so like strawberries or McDonald's. And while that's great, we wanted to bring this to the next level, right? So what are the community conditions that maybe, do you have access to strawberries, or are there only McDonald's in your neighborhood or whatever? So one assignment that we developed to kind of help get there was take pictures of the whole process to make food, make a meal in your house. So from getting the food to preparing it to eating it, what does that look like? And this photo came from that assignment. So this is one of our participants' moms. I had to take the bus to the Meijer, which is a couple of miles away, and stack up all of her things, and it was like a 100-degree week or something like that. So a very powerful image. Okay, our next one is community gardens. This is a community garden in my neighborhood. I visit this garden because I help grow some of the plants. When I look at the garden, I think about some of the neighborhoods that don't have community gardens, and that is not good. When people get out there and plant stuff, they get energy, and they are being active and healthy. So again, an asset in the community. We have this wonderful nonprofit called Growing Hope in Ypsilanti. They do a lot of community gardening, and this just shows the meaning of that to a young person in the community. And then the final one I'm showing is possibilities. Though many might see an old, broken down building, I see a room full of possibilities. So there was a whole week on spaces for young people to hang out. And what they kind of found and what they had believed was that there's really not a lot of spaces for young people to hang out and just be in a safe space in Ypsilanti. There's some programs, but you have limited hours and that sort of thing. We transitioned from this summer program to a youth leadership council that was going to meet throughout the school year. We started off monthly. That did not work, so we went to twice a month, still didn't work, and eventually got to a weekly program. Through that, we developed youth-driven programming. So this Photo Voice project was facilitated by me and graduate level interns, and it worked out well. But when young people were involved in the decision making, they created an evaluation tool for their exhibits. Those were the times when people were really kind of clued in and having a really good time, and it was more impactful programming. So we transitioned from a program that I was facilitating to a program that our youth were facilitating with support from me. We had formal exhibits, so we had one at our 30th anniversary celebration, which was a really big community event. We had one at the School of Social Work and at the state capitol as well. It took some time for us to get to the point where we were ready to take action on something. We had to do a lot of capacity building with the group. It wasn't just like moving from one thing to the next. So what they did decide was that they wanted to create a youth space at the corner. We have this basement at the corner that is just kind of this undefined space that's used for different youth programming, but it's not like owned by young people. There's no youth look to this space. So what they decided is that they were going to create a youth space. So they did a lot of interviews of staff, of patients, of other youth programs that use the space. And now, a year and a half later, they're picking out the colors and the layout and the flooring. So this has been a very long process, but it is getting done, which is really cool. Basically what we learned was that this takes time. This is not the kind of work that you can just do and then you have like instant success. You need to redefine success, kind of figure out with a group what would a good program mean to us, and what is the long haul going to look like. So kind of really being patient with that and doing a lot of self-reflection on that too. As an adult advisor or a youth participant, kind of constantly reflecting on how is this going for me, how is this going for the group, what role am I playing. Media is a great avenue for doing this sort of work. This group, what they did last summer was there was a grant proposal to do health research and a media project. They designed their own project, so it wasn't me just saying we're going to do Photo Voice, which was so cool to now have this group that can design this project. And they decided to do an anti-bullying research and media project. They carried out focus groups, created this really cool media project, and now the action they want to take on that is to create a training for adults on how to support young people in bullying, because they found out that young people don't feel like adults are necessarily always a good resource for them. So building the capacity of groups through evaluation is really, really cool. Nice to meet you all.
So again, this is just another example of some of the same principles we were talking about, obviously at a much larger kind of citywide level, but hopefully between the ideas of doing a program evaluation to a citywide evaluation, you could start to see yourselves within one way that you might be able to implement some of these ideas to engage young people in evaluating and assessing programs, organizations, and communities.
When you think of evaluation, it's boring, it's judgmental, it's like a test. Using media in evaluation makes it more engaging. For example, when at my internship at Urban Neighborhood Initiatives, we did a whole bunch of interviews in the community, just asking community members, what are some of the issues in the community? What do they see are problems? Education just kept coming up. So as a group, we decided to do a more in-depth documentary piece on it. So we went out and then asked people, like, how can we make this better? What are the solutions that you see to this problem, and how can we implement it? So when you use media and evaluation, this makes it more engaging and more fun and more real. It's real, Instead of just sitting down, you circling a whole bunch of answers on the questions, you're actually out doing the work, talking to people, and building relationships, so that makes it very real.